The Tudor History and Travel Show is a podcast that brings Tudor history to life by exploring Tudor places and artefacts in the flesh. You will be travelling through time with Sarah Morris, the Tudor travel guide, uncovering the stories behind some of the most amazing Tudor locations and objects in the UK. Because when you visit a Tudor building, it is only time and not space which separates you from the past. And now over to your host, Sarah Morris.
Hello, my time-travelling friends. It's Sarah, back for another episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. You are most welcome wherever you are tuning into this podcast. Well, as I record this, we are in the first few days of February, and finally the snowdrops and the crocuses are appearing here, which is always warms my heart. Spring is on the way and the days, little by little, are getting a little bit longer. This means we can all get excited for the spring and the summer season that lies ahead and lots of time travelling adventures. Now, before we get on with today's show, I just thought I'd update you with some of my plans for the podcast this year, because this week I have finalised all the podcasts for the entire year, and I thought you'd like to know where I'll be taking you. So along the way, I'm going to be doing a 2-part recording to commemorate the anniversary of the death of Prince Arthur. Of course, Prince Arthur, who died at Ludlow Castle, and I will be recording at Ludlow and then going on to record a piece at his Chantry Chapel and gravesite in Worcester Cathedral. We will also be visiting the likes of Hatfield House, which I'm very excited about, particularly focusing on the old Palace of Hatfield, something that I call the childhood home of Elizabeth I. I'll also be at Haddon Hall up in Derbyshire, which, if any of you have followed me on Instagram, will know one of my favourite places, particularly for its sublime long gallery, which features on so many Tudor dramas and films. We're also going to be visiting the Northwest, and I've arranged to visit a trio of properties, including Little Morton Hall and Speke Hall. And now, the Northwest is an area I haven't spent much time in as the Tudor travel guide, so I am positively delighted to be able to head in that direction and find out all about the history of the area, the Tudor history of the area, and some of its most well-known Tudor locations. Towards the end of the year, I'm going to be doing a 3-part series that really traces the final 2 to 3 years of Catherine of Aragon, from the time that she spent in exile at Buckingham Palace through to her final residence at Kimbolton, where she died, of course, in January 1536. And I'll also be visiting her gravesite at Peterborough Cathedral. So there are 1 or 2 more surprises along the way, but this gives you a flavour of some of the places that we are going to be losing ourselves in over the course of the next 12 months. So I hope that gives you something to look forward to. All right, now let's move on to the subject of today's episode. I headed to the Midlands, in fact to Northamptonshire, to visit a castle which has a long and noble and indeed royal history. It was built shortly after the Norman conquest and then became a favoured royal residence and was visited by a number of medieval kings. When we get to the Tudor period, as you will hear, it had visits from both Henry VII and Henry VIII, including, of course, with Catherine Howard at his side in that famous and historic progress of 1541, which got Catherine into so much trouble. Anyway, it's a fascinating building which, both in its story and in its architecture, tells us of its centuries-long history as various owners have come and gone and left their mark on the castle. So our guide today is the owner of Rockingham Castle, James Saunders-Watson, who will, of course, be introducing himself in a moment. Well, my friends, therefore, let us waste no more time. Let's buckle up, get ready to time travel and head over to Northamptonshire and the venerable Rockingham Castle. So welcome, dear listeners. Today I've headed northwards from my home county of Gloucestershire, and I've come up to the county of Northamptonshire, to a place that I have been wanting to visit literally for years, but I've never quite made it. But today, it's my lucky day. Here I am in the centre of a courtyard of Rockingham Castle, and I'm with the castle's owner, James Saunders-Watson. Hello, James.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting us up here today.
Well, it's delightful. It's a bit of a brisk, cold morning.
It is. We are starting our story outside, but at some point we may have to retreat into the warmth of the house because it is a little bit cold out here today.
But you get much more of a feel for what the building is and the history when you look at it outside. So often you disappear inside because people want to look at pictures.
Yeah.
But actually look at the stones. You actually understand where little bits started and how and why the building is where it is.
Well, you and me definitely are singing from the same song sheet, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about Rockingham that I was keen to get across to people, and we're going to come to all this, dear listeners. It has a long and very interesting history, associations with the Crown, with the Tudor period as well. But architecturally, as you're just hinting at, it's a really interesting castle because it kind of, I think we were saying just before we started to record, the history waxed and waned, and you can still see remnants of the architecture from across its history, from its earliest history into the Tudor period. And I'm hoping you're going to tell us more about that as we go.
I hope so. Well, we are very lucky. We sit in an extraordinary part of Northamptonshire. We are overlooking the Welland Valley, which is one of the rivers that flows into the Wash. It's the northerly river of the three, of the Welland, and then you have the Nen or the Nene. In the Northamptonshire we call it the Nen, and then the Ouse, which sort of it comes through Bedford and goes into King's Lynn. And we are on the edge of a fault line where we sit on limestone, and north of us it becomes more clay, and you can see that it has very commanding views over the valley, and Rockingham itself sits on a spur of land with two natural valleys going up either side of it. Okay. So it was quite an obvious place to pick as a defensive position.
Wonderful. And before we talk about kind of the foundation of the castle, another thing that you were pointing out before we started recording, which I think people should know about who are listening, is this area is rich in Tudor houses, beautiful historic houses. I mean, when you were talking about Welland Valley, immediately, actually, I'm also thinking Collyweston, Margaret Beaufort's house, which overlooked the Welland Valley. So there's one name that most people tuning in will have heard of because we've done podcasts from there before. But could you just give us a flavour of some of the other houses around here that are of significance from the period, just in terms of names?
Well, you've got Burley, of course, which is William Cecil's, Lord Burleigh's house, which is a sort of palace just outside Stamford. There's Margaret Beaufort's house at Collyweston, which when I'm working my way down the Welland Valley. Here at Rockingham, which actually in some respects is quite a minor building in relation to some of these palaces. You have Kirby Hall, which is only 3 miles away, Christopher Hatton's house with the most extraordinarily beautiful bay windows. But again, actually most of it's got no roof on it. You have Apthorpe Palace, Apthorpe Hall, which it's a little bit later because it was James I's palace, but there was definitely a building there before. You have Dean Park, 6 miles from here. Drayton, which if you watched, I'm being so stupid, Saltburn. You watched Saltburn. Okay. That was filmed at Drayton.
Okay.
Drayton is the most stunning house with a Baroque. It's a fortified house, and then inside you have this Baroque facade. I haven't got out of Northamptonshire yet.
Oh my goodness!
Because you've got Tresham.
Of course.
And you had the lived in New Build, which was the stunning building built by Thomas Tresham on the shape of a cross.
Yeah. Oh,
you have the triangular lodge, which is the other, and there's Russian Hall, which was mucked about with, and is more Edwardian. You then go south from here, and you have there's Boughton, which is 10 miles away between here and Kettering, and one tends to think of it as, if you watched Napoleon, it was the model for Versailles. It was used for Versailles, but actually behind it is a Tudor house.
Wonderful.
And it's very, very rich, Northamptonshire, for Tudor building.
So, I mean, I was asking you that because I think Northamptonshire is undervalued by many people. Not undervalued, but not so many people put it on their list of places to stay or to go and see. And I think more people should appreciate the rich history that this county has to offer. So I really wanted to bring that out. It's just a great place to come if you're interested in Tudor houses.
I think I think that there are more big houses that are open to the public in Northamptonshire than any other county and that's including someone like North Yorkshire,
right,
than any other county in England, or England and Wales. It is phenomenally rich. Its geography does not help it, in that it lies geographically northeast, southwest. It's 30 miles wide, and in the blink of an eye on the M1 or on the A1, on the M40, which we're bounded by, you're in and out.
Yes, indeed.
Whereas you will have come all the way up the Foss Way from Gloucestershire, and it would have taken you, it's about 100 miles from northeast to southwest.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'm glad we've firmly established that. Now, back to our story here. You were describing the geography and the fact that Rockingham sits on a peninsula of land. So, when was this castle founded, and by whom, and why?
We know that there was that this valley was populated by Saxons, and Rockingham is a Saxon village, and we think from archaeological work done in the 1960s that the Saxon village actually sits below where the castle is. Wasn't actually on the top of the hill.
Okay.
But when William the Conqueror took the country in 1066, the way that he imposed his authority was by building stone castles. And castles in the Saxon world, they weren't, the whole structure of the community was very different. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm slightly at the edge of my knowledge. Listened a little bit too much to other podcasts, which I won't upset you with, Sarah. And it was by coming and enforcing his rule. And we know from the entry in the Domesday Book that this land was held by Bowie, which was a Saxon tribe, with sack and sock in King Edward's time, and there was room for, I think, 5 ploughs and 3 villeins and whatever, and 2 oxen. And it was waste when King William ordered the castle to be built, and so he picked the site, and you can see when you stand on the wall looking out over the Welland Valley, it's quite clear why they chose it. Yeah. It's got very commanding views. You can see all the way to Uppingham to the north on the other side of the valley. You can look east. You can look out towards Ketton. You see the viaduct at Haringmouth, practically as far as Colley Weston, that you were talking about earlier. And then looking west, we go right down beyond Market Harborough. You can see down to the Lawton Hills, which is 10. And then it used to be in my father's time when you could, the stories were such. You see 5 counties. I never quite believed him, but it was in the days when you had lots of radio masts, and so you could see the radio mast at Rugby.
I see.
So you have very commanding views. Being with 2 steep valleys on either side of this spur of land that juts out from this escarpment, it's quite easy to defend.
Yeah.
And so William ordered a castle to be built on the site. We know from archaeological records that it's the same designer that built this castle that also built Windsor, because they were great castles. They were double bailey castles.
That's an actual term, isn't it? Great castles.
Great castles, yes.
A double bailey castle is a great castle,
yeah.
right?
And the double bailey castle was really designed by or confined by the geography of what you were sitting on. That you think Windsor sits on a volcanic plinth, and so you're on a long, narrow thing, and you put your keep, which is your motte with your mound, with your second line defence, was in the middle of it, and that's what's the same at Rockingham, is that the motte was built halfway between the two baileys, and we've got a model which I'll show you. It's much easier to look at the model. I'll show you, and some photographs, trying to get some feel of it.
Yes.
Here, actually, you can, when you stand on the tower, you can actually sort of see the layout.
Yeah.
But it's
So you've mentioned the natural lie of the land, and of course that was important from a defensive point of view. But the other thing I do know was there was some great hunting around here, so I presume that added considerably to the interest for the royal crown.
You asked me earlier, why is Northamptonshire seen as somewhere which has got so many why is it so rich in large houses? And I think someone told me, he said, well, actually there were 3 royal forests, and the royal forest, which I'm sure your listeners will know, was an area of land designated as only the king was able to hunt the stags or hunt the deer within the forest, and there was some very strict rules, and if you were caught poaching, you ended up probably up a tree with a rope round your neck, and it was very tough. And a forest is not really what we think of a forest, which is a sort of dense woodland. The forest is a mixture of woodland and heath, and the Rockingham forest stretched from Peterborough to south of Kettering, so it was a huge area. There were then 2 further forests, one at the Southsea and one at Whittlesea, which are in the south of the county. And you can see that it was somewhere where the king would come, and he would stay. He partly built Rockingham as a hunting lodge, to come and stay here, stay in the hall while he had a day's entertainment. Also is the nature of the medieval court, that the medieval court had to travel around the country to make sure that the barons didn't get too powerful. And so they would go from their place to place, and they would go to, and Rockingham was somewhere where they would come and stay.
And it really had a rich history, and there were lots of royal visitors. Can you tell us some of the kings that came and stayed here? What do we know about that?
Well, they wouldn't stay for very long. You sort of think, oh, well, you come and sort of set up camp for a month or so. And it tended to be probably as much as a week and a couple of days hunting, and then they'd move on to somewhere else. We know that William Rufus came here in 1095. William the Conqueror never came, but William Rufus certainly came, and he held a parliament where there was a dispute in that the Archbishop Anselm was. Now pallium is there's a particular phrase of something which you seek, the pallium of the Pope, and at that time there were 2 popes. There was one in Rome, and there was one in Avignon, and Clement III, I think it was in Avignon. Archbishop Anselm wished to pay homage to him, and William Rufus wished him to pay homage to Urban in Rome. And there was a dispute, and they came along with the barons and all the bishops and had a parliament here at Rockingham, to which there was no conclusion. And Anselm went to pay homage to Clement in Avignon, and then didn't stay in this country until after William Rufus died.
Right.
He was exiled. But that was the note. So that was one. We know that Henry I planted a vineyard and came here, and I can take you to the site in the park, because there's only one site that's south-facing and drained that we think was the vineyard. We know that Richard the Lionheart met William the Lion of Scotland. Edward I, so we're now 200 years after the castle was built. The castle was all built 1060, 1070. And Edward I is 1260, 1270, so it's 100 years later. 200 years later, and he did some major modifications on the castle. So if you're looking at the Great Hall, which is the cross gable behind us here, ignore the Tudor dormer windows, but all the windows on the ground floor, the chimney, the door, the little room in the eaves, that was all added by Edward I.
Brilliant.
The round towers on the front of the gate, the entrance gatehouse, are also an Edward I addition. Previously, the gatehouse would have been square, and he learnt by fighting in France that round towers were easier to defend because if a trebuchet was fired at them, if you had a round thing, it pinged off. If you had a square, you can knock. And so, if you think of all those Welsh castles, they've all got round towers. The other thing that you like little stories. We tried to Disneyfy, or we have tried to Disneyfy here, and we thought if you look at the towers and you come through, you can see the groove where the portcullis was. And given that these have been mucked about with an awful lot since they were built as defensive towers, we thought, we might put the portcullis back so that it gives a feel of the sort of the medieval castle, and we sort of fitted in. Yeah. And we sent the maintenance team down to the Tower of London to look at the Edward I tower. As you go into the tower, it's actually identical dimensions. It's just it's 2 stories higher. So it looks much narrower.
Right.
But actually the footplate
is exactly the same.
And the whole of the top space is the same. So he did that. And we also know that the little room in the eaves, above the minstrel's gallery, was built for his queen, Eleanor of Castile.
Oh, really?
So if you think of all of those Eleanor's crosses, and there are
Eleanor.
2, that's the same Eleanor.
That's Saint Eleanor.
But she didn't like slumming it in the hall.
In the hall with everybody else, all those men. Don't blame her. Having spent a night on an overnight train surrounded by 5 men in bunk beds, I can completely agree.
So that sort of gives you a bit of a feel. And then Edward III stayed here the longest. He came here in, I think, 1345. He signed the Treaty of Bruges, and he stayed here for a month. So one of the longest times. And Henry V was the last medieval king to stay in the castle as a reigning monarch. Or as an owner.
Okay, brilliant. So we're going to come on to that in a minute. And it's getting very cold out here, so in a minute I think we need to go inside. But before we do, I just wanted to finish talking about the kind of the architecture that we can see around us as we kind of then move into the Tudor story, which will continue inside. I will also just pause for a moment and say, dear listeners, to remind you that there's a show notes page associated with this podcast. If you haven't already tuned in to look at that, there will be pictures in there that illustrate some of the most important features that we're talking about. So we've talked about the medieval castle, and one of the things that is quite evident as soon as you come into the central courtyard is that it is a mixture of styles, and I think that's part of its beauty. It tells a story, it tells its whole story. So you come up to the round towers, you see those beautiful medieval round towers, then you come in here and you can clearly see that this is a later building. So we're heading in, and I suppose that later building starts to tie in with the history that we're about to talk about now. Being the Tudor travel guide, of course I want to know about the Tudor history. And let's start with Henry VII. Did he have any association with Rockingham at all?
Henry VII came here, but by this stage, the castle had rather fallen into disrepair, and it was certainly not good enough for him. And so he stayed in a hunting tower in the park, and we've still got you can see the
you've still got the
moated remains. It's in a spinney in a coppice in the middle of the park, and you can see it on a map, which I'll show you later when we get inside.
Did he build it, or was it already there? Do we know?
Don't know.
We don't know. Okay.
I think the most frustrating thing about so much of that period of history is a lot of it is not recorded, and so most of it is discovered by sort of scratching around. I think that it may well have been there, because we know the medieval park was, and a park is an enclosed area within with an open enclosed area within a forest, as a medieval thing. And we know that the park, where it sits today, was the same park that was there in 1300. It's extraordinary because you can see it on the map. We've got a map from 1615, which you can overlay on an OS map, and it hasn't moved.
The same.
It hasn't moved.
Can you just give us an idea of this? Because there are obviously some remnants. Can you give us an idea of how big this lodge was? Anything we know about the size or scale of it? Golly.
It was a moated tower. Do you know Wofolk Tower? Have you ever been to Wofolk Tower? See, you've got to come back to this part of.
I do. I've only done I've scratched the surface. It appears.
Wofolk Tower was associated with Burley. It's this side of the A1, and it is essentially just a hunting tower. And it's that is what I sort of think it might have been, a lodge.
Yeah.
I would have thought that it was probably about 3/4 the size of this courtyard. It's difficult. It's quite. If you think, and that would have been quite a big.
That's quite.
It's quite a substantial space.
It's quite substantial. Yeah, it's not a tiny little. It's not my idea of a tiny little lodge.
All right, I can show you on the map. I'll show you on to just try and give you a feel. There's the castle.
Yes.
There, that's the castle.
Yes.
There. This is. The lodge is essentially that bit there.
Oh, I see. Now that's quite significant. No, that's quite a size.
It's quite a size.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And you can still see the moat in the thing. Henry VII stayed there, but this castle, I think, had really fallen into quite a bit of disrepair. And I will give you a quote, which you might. There's a Leyland quote, which I need to go and find.
Oh, I love Leyland. Oh,
which
good old.
Talks about it being, and we've got a picture as well, a stylised picture of the castle with ivy on all the wall, because the walls would have been, the curtain wall would have been the height of where that cannon wall is all the way around.
Yeah, so there's one side of the courtyard now is basically pretty open with just a very low wall, but you're saying back at that stage it would have been much higher.
And Sarah, you've got to come, if you just come and, because we just sat in the front courtyard, there are two other terraces, and then a man. You don't really get a feel. So you've just come into the front door.
So we've just walked across the lawn. We're right by the kind of the wall that gives you fantastic views. Right, stretches way out in the countryside. So this is a higher terrace.
Yes, and the reason it's a higher terrace is that when the castle was slighted in the Civil War, after the Civil War, the curtain wall was pushed in because all of the windows are. This is a Tudor building that we're looking at here, and the ground floor is. This level has been lifted up.
Have been lifted up, right? I see. So it's the level of this terrace that has actually been raised, right?
And
I see.
We think it's the wall with this curtain wall, which would have been about this thick, because it's 10 foot thick.
So we're walking.
And you would have had a tower here.
Oh, I see. So the path we're on now, a gravel path, was the size and
of
the wall. I see.
And then you would have had a round tower here, and then on that second terrace, is a ditch.
Yeah.
And we know that because we, when they did a TV series here in the 80s, they fortified it and dug a great big ditch and found the line of the old vallum.
Oh, I see.
So that would have been, and the terracing that's been produced is 1660, post-Civil War.
So we're just looking out, we're actually looking out across the wall, over the fields, over the terraces, and you can see these very distinctive terraces and ditches out with the castle wall.
And you can see that's the old Saxon road.
Oh, I see.
You see
There's
running
a dent.
down.
Yes, a dent in the grass.
And then where that little knoll is, we think that was the Saxon village.
Ah, so not too far away. Not too far away, but much
nearer
lower.
water.
Yeah.
Nearer the water, so you had a water course.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful. Okay.
You need the photographs. It's quite difficult. I'm not very good at as you said, words. So that's your motte. Do you see there's a mine through?
Yes.
But that actually, it's not. But that's where the keep would have been.
Would have been.
And actually, it's set further back inside that. That's a 17th century that was created as a garden feature.
Right. So you were saying Henry VII did come here. Do we know when? Do we know what year?
Well, I could find out.
That may be.
I don't know off the top of my head.
That's a bit of homework for us all to find out the year.
I've probably got that somewhere.
But obviously Henry VIII did come here.
He came here on the
1541 progress
with Catherine Howard.
Yes.
And he was furious because he discovered that the roof on the castle, on the hall, had gone, and there were cattle grazing in the castle. Or if the roof had gone, the roof may not have gone, but there was definitely cattle grazing in the. And the stone, some of the stone had been sold to someone in Leicestershire to build a house. In the same way that there was quite a lot of reusing of redundant buildings.
Right. I'm presuming then he may well have stayed in the lodge as well, as his father had done, if the house was in such disrepair.
Something about he stayed at the Bishop's Palace in...
well, he was at Liddington Bede.
Liddington.
But he did... the Geists say he was at Liddington and he was here, so...
so he might well have been...
So he was probably progressing along, maybe stayed in the lodge for a day or two as he was... I don't think he stayed any longer.
Liddington's not very far away. That wooded hill.
Oh, I see. So Liddington...
Liddington, you can see the church tower. It's 3 miles away. 3 miles.
And that's quite actually for a...
Right. Sorry, if you go over the buildings you can see, you can see a church spire.
Yes.
Low one, but below the hill, that's Liddington.
Oh, I see. So that's actually on the progress, that's not that far. Normally they went 10 to 15 miles in a day.
So I think he might have a day trip.
It might have been just kind of a little hop to check out his castle to see what's... Because that's another thing that they often did when they were on progress. They went to some of their properties to see what kind of state they were in.
Who was looking after it.
Exactly. And if they still needed it, or were they going to give it to somebody else and try and exchange property. So he clearly didn't stay here for very long.
No. Well, there wasn't much. And at that stage also, my ancestor, his father was the surveyor to the Bishop of Lincoln and lived in Liddington. Mm-hmm. So we have quite a strong link with it goes back to our sort of link with Liddington. And he'd always had a love, and it seems odd, he'd had quite a successful Tudor Ariviste career, and somehow he'd always had a love of this place and wanted to get hold of it. And through his godfather was Edward Montague from Boughton, who was the Chief Justice of the Pleas and an executor of Henry VIII's will, and Edward Watson had married one of his daughters. And also he'd worked for Thomas Cromwell, and he was warden of Sandwich Castle, and he'd been involved in planning the King's trip to Boulogne, that he, through those connections, acquired a lease on this building for 80 years.
Oh, what year was that?
1540.
1540.
So it's about the same time of the progress. So it was still a king. It was a sort of 1540. So we know because they then bought the freehold of James I in 1620. So that would have been 80 years later.
And that brings us now, we're going to go inside in a second.
I'm freezing.
It is freezing. But that brings us to the fact that we do have this range of buildings that are clearly not medieval. There are...
You've got a cross gable. Actually, I'm going to take inside because it's easier to explain looking at a model.
Okay.
That we've got, you can see the medieval castle, and then there's a photograph which shows you where the Tudor wings were added on and what they did and how the Tudors took essentially what was a a tithe barn, I think is probably the best way of describing the medieval hall, which was freestanding, and then added and connected and put wings to develop the house that we've now got, to all intents and purposes.
Well, let's go inside.
Because my fingers are falling off.
I'm not surprised. Makes us appreciate the warmth even more. Oh, it's lovely. So we've come in through the main door. This would have been the main entrance to
I think
the
this
hall
would have been, this would have been the medieval hall. That is the medieval doorway. There's another one that goes into a courtyard on the other side. You would have had the minstrel's gallery above. This has moved at some stage.
What the screens? So you've got, when you come in, you've got what appears to be a typical screens passage with the screens dividing the Great Hall from the corridor. But you're pointing out, James, that it's been moved at some point.
It's been moved. The other thing about a medieval house is it's all on one level. So as you're walking through, you'll suddenly notice you've gone through the green baize door into the kitchen. That is the Tudor kitchen.
Isn't it
but
wonderful?
it's been adapted. You also have a medieval street.
Oh, look at that! That's like something you get at Hampton Court. So you've got literally, it's a cobbled courtyard with ranges on either side.
Running up to a 1660 building, so post-Civil War, but that's the curtain wall.
I can see the edge of the medieval curtain wall, yes, just to our left.
And then this is a Tudor range of buildings that goes up.
So I'm presuming we're at the low end of the hall, so this would have all been service,
this is the service
offices,
end.
Kitchens and all of that, pantry, buttery.
Kitchen, brew house, bakery. The building at the end was built as a house, but actually it's the Victorian laundry.
I see. So
and then you would have had a game larder, the Norman flanker, which would have been an original tower. It's now the fuel store. There you go.
Fabulous. Yeah,
So
I love this.
But you get a sort of, and this would have been medieval, because it would have been the access. This is all Tudor. Mm. It would have been the access from the entrance gate up to the main to the keep.
I see. Right. Okay.
So as you were saying, it's a story. This house.
It's wonderful. I love the kitchens.
Yeah,
Great map. Okay, so let me just.
You can describe.
Okay, I'll try and describe it. So we're looking at a 3D reconstructive model of the original medieval castle, which, as James was describing before, you've got the central motte, which is like a raised mound with a circular tower on top of it, and then to either side you have two baileys or courtyards. Clearly one looks as though it's been set out for medieval pleasures of jousting. And the other side, there are lots of other ancillary buildings, which obviously were there to service the castle and the household. That's my description. Is that reasonable?
That is very reasonable.
Okay.
And you can see, earlier we walked out to that tower. So this is the curtain wall.
That's the curtain walls. Oh yes, so we've got the gatehouse with the round tower there. I see.
And then that was the yew hedge that we were looking at. With another tower there.
And this would have originally, when I say this, I'm talking about the round tower on top of the motte. That would have been the principal living quarters at the time.
Wow, I think that was.
Do you think this was?
Yeah. I think they lived here. You had a chapel here, you would have had dwellings. And that was where you went...
Retreated to.
When it was... And if you look at there's a photograph on the wall here with an outline, aerial photograph. So you've got the hall here and the front courtyard.
Yes, freestanding hall.
And then we walked out to there.
Yes.
Looking that way at this. That was that retaining... the 18th century or 17th century garden feature of the motte, with the keep set in a Victorian rose garden. And this, as you rightly described, the Southern Bailey is set out for medieval activities. It is known as the tilting lawn, and it's where we still do jousting.
That's where you
today.
do your jousting today. How
so
fabulous.
it's still used for jousting.
But when you do look at this model, what strikes me is just how big this castle is. It's really sizable.
Yeah, and you don't. When you come here, you tend to think, because the actual house itself sits in 1/8 of the footprint.
I think you're right. I think you come in through those gatehouse and you think, oh, it's really quite small and diddy. And then you see the extent of the Baileys and you're like, this was a little town, like most big medieval castles were. So very interesting. Thank you. That's cleared up a lot. And again, we've got some images that we'll put in the show notes page, guys.
What I love is that when we had this made, which was about 4 years ago, I've been really wanting it to improve and this, what we believe, these on the records of Edward I, these buildings were all here. So where they were exactly, we don't know, but we know from the records of the work that was done that these were certainly here. And everyone comes in and says, I don't recognise it. It's not, because they all can't see the keep, because the keep doesn't exist.
Yes, that's really. Have you ever had any archaeological digs then done on site?
Yes, there was a lot of work done in the 30s which uncovered all the footings for this tower and that moat.
So a couple of the towers that are right in the middle of the Northern Bailey, I guess, if that's the Southern Bailey, I'm guessing.
And so here, this bit here, where that wall comes down, you could see the footings of the tower.
Okay. So let's go back to our story. So we've got the Watson family, which are your ancestors, I should say, took over the lease originally during the reign of Henry VIII and then bought it during the reign of James I. So what did they begin to do here? The place was pretty much in ruins. What do we know about what happens next to the story of the castle?
Well, they came here. I have to say that there's quite a lot of vision about you've got a ruined castle. Why not just go and take an open field and build something from scratch? But I think maybe you had the rudiments of you had stone on site, which would probably be repurposed. And then there was you had the core hall, which is actually quite a substantial building if you think of it freestanding. We'll go and have a look and what they did there, which was they split the hall in half and put a floor in and put bedrooms upstairs and put dormer windows in to the first floor.
Should we go and have a look at the hall now?
Let's go and have a look at the hall.
Let's go and talk about it
in situ. What they also did was that they built. We don't have courtyards as such. They tend to be sort of three-sided on both the north and the south sides, and the Victorians added a range of buildings to close off the southern courtyard.
Ah, right.
But if we wander through...
I noticed you've got some lovely pictures of the castle and this
Now,
glorious map. Look
No,
at
I was
it.
talking about the hunting tower. So there's the hunting tower on this. This map is 1615. It's actually the original one is in the
facsimile,
it's the facsimile.
Yeah.
And you've got the castle with all of the walls, and then the village, which was literally where you parked your car. And then it got moved.
I see. So there
after
was
the Civil War, so
right.
the village and the market square, and we've got the grant of the market and Elizabethan. I'll dig that out for you.
I
actually.
love the fact that you've got the lodge is on the park and shows you exactly where it is.
And it's there, and that track's still there. And that you overlay over an Ordnance Survey map.
And it's still exactly the same. So
I'm going to do this on the phone for you.
Chris is going to take a picture of that.
You'll take a picture of it, but I will show you on the OS map. If you look at that, it's not really the track, but actually...
Oh, right, yeah.
There you are, right, there. That's the fence line. So there's the park. And actually it's that ditch line there, is that one.
So, yeah, brilliant.
Is that not extraordinary?
Yeah, it is.
Do you think it hasn't really changed? And this raid still exists.
Netherfield. Netherfields, yeah.
Yes.
Cottingham Fields. Cottingham Common. Rockingham Common. How wonderful.
Cow pasture, we still call that cow pasture.
What a great map.
Isn't it?
Right.
So
Let's go
let's
through
go
to
to
the
the
hall.
hall. But the Tudor house, they put three gables. So this is the end. We're just walking into the original medieval hall.
Right, it's a huge thick wall you can see.
So
There's an
absolutely
enormous thick
if you're
wall.
not looking, you go
Yes.
through. And there were three gables from the which were all Tudor, of which the first one runs up all the way up to towards the keep, and was the service wing with the kitchen.
Yes, so
and then buildings.
they added the service wing in.
Well,
yes. Or upgraded it, maybe.
I think they upgraded. We had a historic building specialist came on. He said it's very interesting. They've obviously added some stories to it, but he felt that the first range of the three gables to the curtain wall may well have been medieval because the stonework's different.
Oh, I see, right.
And that there must have been some service.
There must have been a kitchen.
There must have been a kitchen
yes,
somewhere.
exactly. That's why I pedalled backwards and thought actually they probably redeveloped it because there must have been that service wing and a kitchen.
And we know that behind what is a 20th century range, behind that is a inglenook, which is the Tudor fire. And we also, if we come into the kitchen, it does have a feel of a kitchen. It's been a bit Disneyfied.
It's gorgeous. I love it.
That you can see that we've got some sort of plastic food,
Yes.
but it does give you a feel of what might have been
absolutely
the kitchen. And you've got the old spit, which would have been driven by a vane inside the chimney to turn it round, so you didn't have to have the little boy turning the meat. And it's got a 1680 essentially a charcoal barbecue range in the kitchen, which has got a Victorian canopy put on top of it.
I love this. Is this a pestle and mortar?
It is a pestle and mortar. You're the first person to get that right.
Really?
Definitely.
You're kidding.
No one said, what is that?
You see, I want a pestle and mortar. Didn't I say we needed a pestle and mortar? This is what we need. This is brilliant, isn't it? That's
but
fantastic.
What you're looking at is on a freestand is a big bowl with a wooden top and then a pestle which sits in it, which is then goes through a wrought iron frame onto the wall. And you think, well, why is it so thin?
Yes.
Well, if I take it out of the pestle and Sarah ask you to turn it, because you love pestles, easy, give that a go.
Yeah, it sort of wobbles around a bit, doesn't it? So I could see it'd be quite nice to have it steadied so you can really get some downwards. You get some downwards.
You shove it back into the little pole.
Yeah, Yeah, you don't have to worry about what's going on at the top. You can just give the downward force onto it.
It's kind of extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, very nice. I love our ancestors. They worked out these fantastic ways to do things.
Well, we all think we create things, and you think someone realised.
Many, yeah.
Don't ask me what age that is.
No,
yeah. Let's get and have a look in the Great Hall.
Let's do it.
So you've gone through into the hall. That is the original medieval spiral staircase that went up to the room which Eleanor's
bedroom.
Well, it would have originally gone to the minstrel's gallery, and then above that would have been to the little room in the east, which is still there, which was Queen Eleanor's bedroom. So you get a sort of feel of. But this place is a hodgepodge of different bits. You move. You're moving essentially into your favourite period of a Tudor room.
Yes, I'm feeling at home here. We've got lots of lovely. So we're in this beautiful open hall. The fire is on. Yes. James has gone to go right next to the fireplace to warm up. You stay there while I describe the room. So we're in a beautiful hall. Lots of huge, lovely oak cross timbers, and I'm going to ask James in a minute what all the inscriptions are all about. And then we've got some oak panelling and lots of portraits of people I recognise. So we've got Elizabeth I there in a rather lovely scarlet dress. This is Francis I, always recognisable. Who else have we got? I don't know whether
on the top shelf, we don't know quite where they came from, but they were sort of what I call Elizabethan worthies. So you've got Peregrine Bertie, who is Grimthorpe. He was the great Tudor general. Then you've got, now, because I've moved them around.
You have definitely some Watsons.
That's a
here.
Watson. The lower level of lower life, that's Watson. Then you've got up here, you have, it's Leicester, I think.
I know my eyesight is not.
It's Leicester. It's Robert Dudley.
It does look a bit.
Robert Dudley.
Yes.
Favourite of the Queen.
Yes, he's definitely got the Leicester pose. That's for sure.
And then you have a Howard.
Yes, Howard.
Surrey,
and a Burley.
And a Burley.
I recognise the Burley.
So these were, and then the rest of you've got a couple of Watsons. So this is there's a picture of Edward Watson, who is who got the lease of the castle in prayer, in quite a sort of
evangelical
style. Yes.
Hands raised to the air, indeed.
But he must have been. You've got this wonderful inscription on the beam of when he finished the castle. The house shall be preserved and never will decay, where the Almighty God is honoured and served day by day. 1579.
Wow. So obviously they've been renovated, but those were the quotes that have been on the ceiling since that time.
Since that time. Yes, they painted quite recently, because the smoke in here tends to leave a mark.
And who is this chap here?
That's
Another
him
Edward
again.
Watson.
It's the same. It's the same.
It's the same man.
Same man.
At different ages of his life. Yeah.
And then you've got his son above the fireplace, who we think we've got.
Mary Boleyn, isn't it?
Mary Boleyn.
Mary Boleyn, I recognise from a distance.
It is.
Oh, that's Jane Seymour.
No, well, we think it's.
I think that's Mary Boleyn.
It's Mary Boleyn. Yes, we've done some homework.
Yes.
But there was a reason for the purchase. I think there's a Seymour connection through the family that came in later on, and I think that there was some. You know how people ascribe things to certain things?
Oh, it happens all the time. And is this an original 16th century?
Yes.
Wow. So this could be a contemporary portrait of Mary.
Yeah, we think so.
I'm loving it. It's very similar to the one that's in Hever, but that's not. I don't think that's an original portrait. But this is lovely. Oh, wow.
So what we tried to do with the tour, Sarah, is that the Great Hall is essentially a Tudor room. I have to slightly disappoint you that it's all a bit bogus, because the panelling was put back in place in the turn of the 20th century.
I knew you were going to say that.
Because there's a watercolour. On the wall over there, which shows it in 1860 when it's whitewashed. Without. Yeah. And you can see all the pictures. What's lovely is actually, I'll point you to the picture. I recognise the pictures in the watercolour. So we'll come and see these two pictures. I will show you. They hang in the corridor, literally through that door, and they blocked up the fireplace.
How interesting.
Isn't that extraordinary? And it was completely whitewashed. And that table's next door. These chairs are definitely the ones, because there are all these ones here. Yeah. That's what I saw. It's slightly naive.
I love it when you see these old paintings that just show you what the original room
well, it was once that's what it was used to.
Yeah. Well, of course, back in the day when it was full height, because it's been I presume there's been a floor added.
Well, that was done. That's the Tudor. The Tudors put the floor in.
Yeah.
So you got Tudor bedrooms upstairs.
I mean, you wouldn't have had panelling in a great hall. It would have been tapestries. Tapestries, really.
Although the interesting thing is next door, which is the other half of the Great Hall, decorated 100 years later, is panelling.
Okay.
So I think panelling might well have, and we've had to take take that wall off. Or was it that one? We had dry rot, and this all comes off. So you think it's all rather robust, but it's not. It's a screw in the wall up here.
Do you know why you've ended up with that? Sorry, I've ended up next to the portrait of Francis I again. Do you know why he's here? How did he end up here?
Why the family story, which is never let the truth get in the way of a good deed, is that Edward Watson, who was the person who got the lease on the castle and did all of the work, was involved with the organising of the aborted trip to Boulogne in 1540.
Right.
And we have a beautiful bound account book, which sits in the meeting room. It has come out on display. Actually, it's gone away again. It's sort of partly because one gets very worried about putting too many things that does so much damage to them. Beautiful leather bound thing, which never got used. So he turned it upside down and used it for the estate accounts. But we know that he was very much involved. He was the warden of Sandwich Castle, and he was involved in the whole of that exercise.
So then maybe that's the French connection.
And we think I always tend to say it's a bit like being given the photograph of the king.
Yeah.
Signed.
Yeah.
Do you know? And I think that's where it may well have come from.
Interesting. Great. It's lovely. I feel right at home, surrounded by these.
And you did point to the picture of Elizabeth, which recently has been reattributed by Roy Strong to Gower as an early, and he's the great Gloriana specialist, and he didn't know this one existed, and
I've never seen it before actually, but she's clearly pre the Virgin Queen because she has more of that human face. She looks young, a little bit younger than that.
I was going to say she's probably not. I would say that's quite early in the reign.
I would say so too.
You know,
I would say so too. It reminds me of another picture that I came across. Hadn't been widely. It wasn't widely on the internet. I came across it via a gallery in London. It was privately owned. I'd never seen it before, and she had that same. It's one of the most human pictures of her I've seen.
Because the later ones became very stylised.
Yeah, very stylised. Yeah, it's a beautiful dress, and look at that jewel at the end of her girdle. Wowee!
I'd quite like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. You haven't got that in the attic, have you?
No, sadly not. If only.
Yeah.
I think it might have been sold some time ago.
I think so, and melted down probably. But it's gorgeous. What a tiny little waist she's got as well.
God, I know.
You really do see it.
So,
on
what
that
other
portrait.
bits of Tudor thing? From a Tudor history point of view, where Rockingham's going is you see how it gets adapted. And this is turning what was a medieval castle into something which was livable in. Yeah. So what was the original, I call it a tied barn, because I try to describe, when you're taking people around, you've got to give a sort of feel, it's all rather sanitised today. It's clean. Actually, I was going to say it's warm. It's not feeling a bit cold. It's normally quite warm, and it sort of feels modern. If you imagine what the medieval house would have been, the smell, the filth, you would have had reeds on the floor, you would have had no windows with oil lamps, and the king would have lived at one end, and everybody else at the other end. And I keep on saying, I'm not quite sure where the loos were, but they don't think they...
Yeah, right. And this would have been full of smoke as well.
And you would have originally had 2 8.5 fires.
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah.
So the chimneys were only added in the
Tudor period.
No, I think that's Edward I.
Ah, right, okay.
So it's an Inglenook. And there's a little quirk. What is the thing? You're the expert. What's the little quirk? What's that little store there? What's that cupboard for?
I immediately... No, it can't be candles. Can't be, because it's too close to the fire for that.
It's a salt cellar.
Salt?
And it's got a draft hole here, so that it keeps dry. Because salt was a preservative.
Yes.
Yeah, Chris is on it.
Chris is on it. He's got a medieval fireplace at home.
The other thing is that it's an absolute nightmare to clean. It's straight as a die.
Look at that. I'm looking up.
The fire
is on, and I'm looking up the chimney. That is nice. It's nice and warm in here, I can tell you that.
And the chimney, we had somebody, he said, he turned up in his chimney suit and tie with one of his vacuum cleaners, which was, he said, oh no, I can't, no, your wood's too, no. You then got the real guy who actually climbs up inside and chips it.
Really?
You need an expert to understand. Normal chimney sweeps can't cope with it.
No. So we've got Edward who took over the lease, and then your family continued to live here.
We've been here, and Edward really finished. He didn't quite finish building the gallery wing, which was the west.
So that's really perpendicular to where we are now, sitting at right angle. So there was a long gallery there, was there?
There is a long gallery.
There still is a long gallery.
There.
Do you think is that part of your private?
It was a third longer, and it never quite got finished. And then after the Civil War, they restricted it to the 2/3 the length.
I see.
And we know by reading the Latin inscriptions, it wasn't finished until 1630. and then rebuilt it after the Civil War. I think that the second generation Watson didn't do an awful lot here. The second ever Watson lived here, but he was great friends. So thinking of Tudor history, he was close friend of Francis Tresham, and they were related to Digby's. And if you've got any slight knowledge about gunpowder treason and plot, you'll realise that there was, and we were talking earlier about recusancy and Catholics, and that there is a bit of, particularly with the Tresham connection, quite a strong, and Catesby at Ashby St St Edges, which is just the other side of Northampton. You had Vaux living at Harrowden, Frogmorton was in Warwickshire. There was quite a strong Catholic thing, and we don't know, but we think that he was his sympathies were probably more to the old religion. Right. His grandson, Edward Watson I, was much more dynamic. He was the person who entertained James I here in 1620, or 1610, sorry, and then bought the freehold of the castle in 1620. He finished off the building work that his grandfather had started. He then also had a crisis in the end of life because he married Eleanor Manners, who was a parliamentarian family. He was sort of a bit wet, but said he was a royalist, thought he was safe in his castle during the Civil War, and the castle got sacked by the parliamentarians. The king was so cross with Watson that he locked him up for losing his castle in Belvoir Castle, which was the Manners house outside in sort of near Grantham, which is also where Watson had sent all his silver. So he not only lost his house, but he lost all his valuables. He was then pardoned by the king, joined the king at Oxford, and came back here, but didn't really. It was more his son that rebuilt the castle after the Civil War. But
so there was quite a lot of damage here during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right.
So we don't have a lot of Tudor furniture, for instance. And I'm always rather surprised that so many of the Tudor pictures survived. You would have thought they would have been garrisoned. You think of what happened to those houses during the Second World War, and they got completely trashed.
Trashed, really, is the word for it. Are there any other spaces that we should be seeing, or is this the most important space for us to?
Because I think I'm going to take your little Tudor people on a bit of a tour moving forward. So we're going to move on 100. You like nuggets and things.
Yeah, what's
that? Because that's also Tudor.
It's not paperweight for the office.
It is. You lift it up.
Oh, well, it's obviously had something through. No, it can't be.
It's a wool weight.
A wool weight?
So that
to measure
would be put
things.
on one side of the scale, and a bale of wool was put on the other.
Gosh, that is heavy.
It's got the Elizabeth I.
Yeah, so it's a royal coat.
Royal coat of arms. So it's
wow.
Weighs a bit.
It does.
And then you've got King John's chest, just to not really, but it's a medieval travelling chest. Wow. But my great grandmother, who really did tell the most wonderful porky pie. So that's King John left it on his way to the wash.
I see. That's funny.
said I said there's the two pictures.
Yeah.
So that is Edward Montague, who's Boughton, who I said, who was the Chief Justice of the Pleas, executor of Henry VIII, and seems to have been a bit of a sort of father of everything around. You go to any house in Northamptonshire, everybody seems to have his portrait. So I sort of think that he was obviously a very influential character. And then the lady next to him is his daughter, who married Edward Watson.
Right.
And she's, what I think is quite interesting is it's actually probably got an accurate picture of her. It's not terribly styled. When I look behind me and I've got a Lily, which they all came out the same sausage factory.
Yes, they do.
They all look the same.
These are sort of 18th century ladies with their...
That's 1670, 1650.
Right, okay.
She was the daughter of Thomas. There were the two daughters of Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford, who, not your period.
Not my period. I won't know anything about it. No.
But he was executed in 1641, Viceroy of Ireland, and he was impeached in lieu of the King, Charles I.
Oh, gosh.
So, and have you ever been to Wentworth Woodhouse?
No.
Not your period, you see.
Yeah.
Largest Georgian Palladium front near Rotherham.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Yeah.
I have seen
It's
it.
that
Yeah.
family. It's that family.
Yeah.
So
What a
we have now
beautiful-
moved 100 years later in terms of decoration,
Yes.
but you're still in the medieval hall. It's the other half of the medieval hall. The panelling, we're sitting in a room which is decorated in about 1660, 1670, and it's using deal panelling, which has been stained by the Victorians to look like oak. And the reason it's got deal panelling is that oak was in a premium after the Great Fire of London.
Okay.
And so pine was cheap. And strip pine, actually, there is a bit of example of strip pine. It's actually very, very attractive. It's not quite so heavy. But it's also a room of reconciliation, so a lot of coats of arms. It was all about bringing the family together after the crisis of the Civil
War.
And it was then used as a Victorian dining room. And we use it as a sitting room. It's sort of set up as a sitting room.
But yes, but originally we'd have just had one big space.
You would have
It's
been
just
one big space.
divided up.
And up to the sea. And the window
Yeah.
is a Tudor window.
Yes, beautiful.
With the west view. Well, but you see, and I was talking about levels.
Yes.
The terrace on the outside, which we think is when they slighted the castle and the curtain wall was pushed inwards, that the debris was
There's
used.
so much
and
I
level.
see. Yeah, to raise the level of the
Yeah.
ground. Yes, you're almost as you look out
You're
the window, you're
doing
almost
on
the
that
grass is
ground
almost
level.
at eye height, almost, not quite. Yeah, it's a lovely room.
So it's a completely different feel to where you were. But you were saying, and I'd say you were talking about how houses get adapted. This has we're now going into one of the wings, which was added by Edward Watson, and
So we're we're now moving at 90 degrees again. We're sort of
you're going down a south wing.
a south wing, right?
And this was the first room you come into is a lobby with access into the garden, an outdoor access, and it is where we think the staircase for the Tudor house
I
was,
see, right.
because the staircase behind me is Victorian. But again, you don't really. We struggle a bit. We've got some plans, but we don't have a lot of plans. Often you don't have. Today you have what is
Of course, the
drawing
architect's
today.
plans, yeah.
You don't have quite the same thing.
So what's the earliest plan of the house that you've got?
We've got quite a lot of Victorian, because there was a lot of Salvin was employed in by Richard Watson in about 1835 to take what was essentially this house throughout the 18th century had become a hunting box. The family had big estates elsewhere,
Right.
and they would come up here, they'd hunt their pack of hounds, they'd use it rather like most other people use a holiday house. It sort of seems a bit strange, but and there was an agent that lived in the building across the courtyard, the front courtyard. That's where he lived and looked after the house.
Okay.
And the family would come. It then went to the youngest son, and he employed Salvin to turn it into a more comfortable dwelling. Because it's a bit like being in an Oxford college. You're a single room everywhere. There's no every room is exposed on each side, but that's very much a Tudor house because if you go to it was about air. It was also, I think, about light, and it was also about how big your timbers were and construction. So we've now gone into what was originally two Tudor rooms, and there was another room beyond the bookshelf at the end, and this was knocked into one. We don't quite know when, but certainly Salvin. It was that I've got a watercolour in 1860 when this room was created and turned into from two rooms to one into a library, and you've got an 18th century and a 19th century library in here.
So I'm presuming, because I'm just thinking away the hall, we came in at the low end of the hall and then we exited through the high end. So we've come into what would have been the private apartments, the living apartments
of the family.
And you can see that the rooms are getting smaller and cosier, even though they have been adapted at a later date. I imagine, the proportions.
The room beyond is actually, it's even smaller than this.
Yeah.
It really would have been whether it was a bedroom or whatever. And the bedrooms upstairs are about the same size as this. But again, I talked about how decor is so bogus. This was decorated in the Adam style, say Georgian style, in 1910.
Right.
From someone wandering around the house, actually it's quite fun. You see different periods, different decorative styles. You get a bit of a feel for each century.
Yeah.
In some ways.
But this is, I think, really good. Rockingham's really good for illustrating just how houses do survive and evolve. And we've got this medieval castle, and so many medieval castles are completely in ruins. But this has, despite its rising and falling fortunes, it's survived. And we've got this sense now of how subsequent families over the centuries have developed and made use of the earlier spaces, which I think is really interesting.
And my 20th century contribution is also here, but you may not, is that there's a lot of 20th century British art, which some people, next door, there is some, you were just wowing the room and trying to link it back. But the 20th century is, that's where we've brought sort of...
That's your passion?
Well, my great uncle was the great buyer, but we've bought bits and pieces as well, and you've got to keep these. Yeah. The other thing is you've got to keep these houses alive. This room, we redecorated this room 12 years ago, and we thought we'd been really clever going from green to blue, and then we found a watercolour in an auction in Nottingham of this room in 1860 with a few swags and drapes and red curtains and blue wallpaper. Every time.
Yeah. You obviously picked the right thing, the house was speaking
my
to
wife
you.
is, I give total credit to my wife. That's not my skill set. She's brilliant at that.
You've got a lovely collection of portraits, haven't you, and pictures?
We've got. There's a story with the people, and there's a story with having pictures is fun. You're now moving into from your Tudor point of view. It's quite interesting because you can see the two Tudor chimneys
sticking out
because the Victorians have added a corridor.
Yeah, so now we're still indoors now, but in the Tudor period we would have been outside. Yeah.
And then the Victorians have added a rather grand staircase.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Which but you get we haven't had a chance. I just can't take. You get a view of the courtyard, which actually you get that. So there on the other side of the courtyard is the Tudor.
Kitchen range, the service range, yes.
With the scullery and then the old kitchen behind that, and then the laundry at the top. But you get that feel of the two courtyards, and the Victorians have closed it off a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, very good.
It's warmer here.
It's lovely and warm, isn't it?
I can feel it.
Yeah, you're coming back to life.
I'm totally coming back that way.
Yeah. I did keep you outside quite a long time. I do
I
apologise.
know, but and talking about pictures, we were talking about the guy who lost it all in the Civil War.
Yes.
So this is him as a young man, and then 5 years later, this is him as a rather
older grey,
rather worn,
a man who's been worn down by life.
And then you've got his wife there, who is the manners. But those are actually, the artist is someone who's slightly overlooked, a guy called William Dobson, who was Charles I, who took over really from Anthony van Dyck as the court artist. But these pictures are quite small. They're just headpieces because materials were in short supply and paint was in short supply because of the war. So they're not. They're quite. You tend to think of big pictures. Now, the one we've not been to, from a Tudor perspective, is the gallery.
So we're heading upstairs to go to the Long Gallery.
Now this would have been a third as long.
Oh, I say. How lovely. Yes, so one third further.
A Tudor room decorated, can you tell me?
Can I sorry,
What period do you think you're...
Oh, gosh.
Oh, come on.
Well, this is Georgian, isn't it?
No, Victorian.
Victorian, of course it is.
Swags and drapes.
Yeah.
So it's quite... the Tudor room would not have had the bay because the flag tower was added by Salvin.
Right.
And it creates a completely different feel to the room. If you think... Because I'm absolutely right. We always say this is built as an exercise chamber. That was what a gallery was.
Yeah, absolutely.
To come up and walk up and down, or to sport, or whatever. And then they used it for hanging pretentious pictures of themselves. Yeah. And I'll say that in a moment because you'll see why. Because it's a very pretentious picture of me. And then the Victorians turned this into their main drawing room. And what I love about reuse, recycle is the fireplace has a date on it. But it doesn't relate to the fireplace because that was actually the bed head. And then the headboards.
Oh, you're up there. I love a good bit of recycling.
Recycling, I love it. I just, we all think, we don't recycle. But
yeah, no. Tudors were great. Tudors were brilliant recyclers. They recycled everything. Clothing as well as furniture and wonderful.
So, and you've got, now your pictures up here are later. So from your
nobody I recognise, except perhaps one.
That is Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford.
Oh, I see, right.
Van Dyck. The rest of them are Georgian or later. And there was a sort of, because of his daughter married the Watson, his son died, all of his estates in Yorkshire passed to his elder daughter, who then gave him to the second son, her second son. So the older son got Rockingham, and the second son got Wentworth Woodhouse, which was slightly bigger.
Yes.
And had coal. So he did quite well.
Yeah.
And that is the second son there. And it was his son who built the house at Wentworth Woodhouse.
These chandeliers are quite something, aren't they?
They're Venetian.
Wow.
1820 Murano. But if you like them so much, you can go and buy. They still make them.
I don't think that would go in our front room somehow.
You can have the sconce.
Yeah, that's a bit more like it.
They're a bit more like it, yeah, they are.
Oh dear. Lovely.
Yeah. So, and there's, in terms of sort of other little bits that, I know we're talking Tudor times, but Charles Dickens came here a lot.
Did he?
And he performed, he stayed here 4 times, and one time he stayed here 10 days, and he used to do plays, and he based Bleak House, Chesney Wold, which is the country house in the Bleak House story, was based on Rockingham. And you can read, he was a great observer, and he copied, or you read it and you say, oh,
I recognise
that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of...
Authors do a lot of that kind of thing. They build on their absolute
I love the
experience.
fact that people see things and we sort of think that it's all in the head. No, you've got to pick it up and start somewhere.
I know when I was writing my novel about Anne Boleyn, I would weave in lots of things that I just experienced for myself. You know, it's quite. It's where, as you say, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It is informed by your experience.
So again, you were asking about how did these spaces get evolved, and this is again what Rockingham shows you, is that you have a little bit of each century.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's we are essentially at heart of Tudor house. But if you go to Burley, it is essentially Tudor. And you go inside, it's not.
Yeah, you can't. No,
it's a bit. And so you have to.
Yeah.
And actually, I couldn't live. It'd be too cold to live in a Tudor house. And all those big coats and hats.
Yes. Fires roaring all the time. You'd need it. Good. So does that bring us to the end of our tour? I think it might do.
Possibly does.
Marvellous. So I've loved our journey through the centuries, through medieval and the great Plantagenet kings and how it was used as a royal pleasure palace, through the Tudors and what they did to transform that medieval castle into a really luxurious, comfortable family home. And I think Rockingham gives us a great example of that. So thank you very much for illustrating that and taking us on the tour. But before we go, as ever, of course, people, I hope, guys out there, you've had your interest piqued and would be loving to come and stand here in the Long Gallery for yourself and enjoy Rockingham's history. So how do people find out about you? And also, when do you open? Are you open all year, or is it restricted opening? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Our opening times are primarily, it's a summer activity. We open from Easter through till the end of September. Sundays in April and May, and then Tuesdays and also bank holidays throughout the rest of the summer. We do for those with irritated and bored children in winter half term, we do a Halloween event where we cover the place in cobwebs to all intents and purposes. And we do a Christmas event where we dress it for a Victorian Christmas, and that's in November. And then there are lots of sort of events that go on, whether and the house is open very much for free flow to come and have a look round. There are guides who are very engaged. We're very much encouraging them to be knowledgeable about the house and the history. So with your different periods, do come and see. And we do a lot of events as well. We have a website which has all our opening times and events on it. www.rockinghamcastle.com.
Brilliant, great. And of course that link will be in the description associated with the podcast and also in our show notes, folks. And as you mentioned before, some of those events, for example, include jousting. So if people want a great day out watching the jousters.
That's a bit of reenacted as the reenactment village. And we've also got, if you're on totally different, we'll have music festivals and theatre.
Yes, I saw that all on your website. There's lots going on, so it's well worth having a good old look.
I'm hoping that we have the Motown, that we had a really good Motown tribute band. Absolutely fantastic. I'm not a Motown fan, but I've forgotten how big the enormous amount of music. The back catalogue's vast.
Yeah.
So that was good.
Okay. So it's a cultural centre. It's a historic centre. So check the website out, my dear friends. I do hope you've enjoyed our tour today, and it's just a massive thank you to James for inviting us and showing us around today.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have indeed. Well, I hope you enjoyed that adventure in time. And as ever, of course, a massive thanks to our host, James Saunders-Watson, for guiding us today. And of course, the team at Rockingham who helped make all this possible behind the scenes. Huge gratitude from me. Don't forget to visit the castle website so you can find out all the details associated with the opening times for 2025, and perhaps make a point of putting it on your itinerary along with some of the other places that James was talking about. Northamptonshire really is a very rich and I think often overlooked county for its Tudor history and its fabulous historic houses. Well, we are coming to the end of this episode, but a couple of just very quick points. First of all, if you've been considering coming on tour with me as part of Simply Tudor Tours, you might want to know that there are now only 4 places left for this September's tour. So if you do want to book your place, head on over to www.simplytudortours.com. And in fact, I'll make sure that there is a link in the description associated with this podcast that goes straight to the information page for that particular tour. And while I'm here, just also to note that our 2026 tour, July 2026, which is entitled 1502, the year that shook the Tudor throne, also only has 4 places available. And that will be a lovely midsummer tour through some of the most glorious parts of the English countryside, of course, the Cotswolds, where I live. Next month's podcast will be coming from Helen's Manor. I'll be recording on location later on this month, so I will look forward to bringing that your way. And I'll also be including an important announcement about what's coming up with the Tudor Travel Guide later on this year. So you want to tune in for that? Do not miss out, my friends. Okay, well, that is absolutely it. It's time for me to say goodbye. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you again next month. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Tudor History and Travel Show. If you've loved the show, please take a moment to subscribe, like and rate this podcast so that we can spread the Tudor love. Until next time, my friends, all that remains for me to say is happy time travelling.